G'day there, welcome to the Alpha Wave Trader week ahead. Today I thought I'd just quickly focus on a couple of stocks that are exposed to the water entitlement market, with the government doing a lot of that buyback of water entitlements over the last few years, and the trading that's going on, and all of the fears of climate change, etc., etc. The water market, I think, is a fairly interesting one, and there's not that many companies where you can gain a good exposure to it. So I just thought I'd show you a couple, give you a bit of a sense of what they're about, and so you can go and do your own research and have a think about whether it might be a good addition to your portfolio. So first of all, we'll have a look at Duxton Water. They're a pure play in the water entitlement market. They've actually just done a capital raise, which is just closed. Did about 15 million. They're also doing a share purchase plan at the same price. I think it's $1.48 was the price of the placement that they've done. So that's why we've seen a bit of weakness in their price. Now, their market cap was around 160 mil before the placement went through, and after the share purchase plan's all wrapped up, I'm not sure exactly what the figure will be, but it's going to be up around I guess north of 180 to 190. Look, prior to the capital raise, the net asset value of the water entitlements they had were up around $1.60, so it looks like they do trade fairly close to the NAV of their water entitlements, and you can see it's been quite a nice steady growth in the price of the company. The rally we've seen since listing only a couple of years ago has been a nice steady one, and this is the quarterly chart you can see here. And if we just look at the pivots, etc., when you've got that lowest price candle that happened there in late 2016, needed to wait until late 2017 before we got the buy pivot. So that would be a close above the high of the lowest price candle. And from there, it's been a nice steady trend higher. You can see if we look at just key bars, which is when you get a new closing high above the high of that pivot candle, that would be the first key bar, and then you're following each key bar after that with a new closing high. And you can see it's been a nice, strong, steady trend on those quarterlies, pulling back towards the midpoint of that key bar there, also the midpoint of the key bar there, pulling down into that sort of midpoint to the buy zone of that key bar there, that next one. It's a very interesting point to keep your eye on in those longer term charts to understand how these trends develop. So it's a really nice steady trend, and with the sell-off on the back of that capital raise, you'd say it's not going to sell off too much further, but it does take a bit of time to soak up that new stock, and it's been a bit of dilution going on. So I'd say, though, based on the key bars and how this trend is developing, that you'd be a pretty keen buyer if it was to sell off a little bit further into this sort of 140 area. It's a pretty interesting spot within this longer term uptrend, and it is being supported by the value of the water entitlements. It really is a play on that, and the yield is pretty good. So yeah, it's an interesting little company to go and research if you wanted to gain exposure to the water markets. Webster is another one which does more than just buy the water entitlements. They have a market cap which is quite a bit larger than D2O. Their market cap around 550 mil, and their current water entitlement value apparently around 350 mil, but that could have changed. That's a bit of an older figure, just from a few months ago. but they're actually using their water entitlements to, buy up almond and walnut orchards, etc. So they can use the water entitlements and add value that way. So it's a bit of a different play than the D2O, which is purely based on getting a spread of different water assets. But they have about 150,000 megalitres, Webster, whereas D2O only has about 60,000 megalitres. So they do have much larger water entitlements, but you do have to do a bit of research on all of the different types of water entitlements and their value to understand them. But looking at Webster, it's just a lovely looking chart that is slowly but surely heading north. Up from 50 odd cents around 2012 up through $1.50 now. But it's a nice, strong, steady trend. We have actually created a new high. If you just look at this little break above that previous high, so we now have a new highest low within the waves higher. So if we're just looking at, this is a nice strong trend, but we're just understanding how this develops, and we've actually got a new high. So now we've got an area within this previous wave that we're interested in looking at the stock, and that would be sort of the buy zone of that wave. So if I was to just quickly, so looking in a very cursory way of just how this trend is developing, you wouldn't be too happy if prices headed back below $1 from here, because that is that previous highest low within this uptrend. So if the trend is going to continue and be nice and strong, we really don't want it moving back below $1. So that sort of gives you an area where you'd be willing to consider getting out of the stock if you were to look to buy into it. And it's just the area where you often find great support within trends, is what I call the buy zone. That's 75 to 87.5% retracement of the wave. So that's down around 130, 110 to 130, let's say, is an area where it'd be interesting. And what you're doing is if we do have a move down into that zone, you can then wait until you actually see a reversal. So that's when I get those buy pivots, and I could wait until we get either a weekly or a monthly perhaps. But it's just shaping up as a nice longer term play, and it's pretty steady as she goes, the way it's developing. It's not a stock that's flying around madly all over the place. It is steadily increasing in value as it builds its assets. So this sort of one is one that you could have a longer term time frame on it, looking at it from the investment perspective. If you were positive on the sort of longer term dynamics within the water markets in Australia, this is not a bad approach. So there's two little companies in an interesting area, and in an area where there really isn't many ways you can gain an exposure, and both with pretty solid looking charts. So that's it for today. I'll come back with more next week. Cheers.